Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us on our July 1st Friday event. We're going to start off with a great presentation today by Dr. Betsy Lamb. Betsy is the Ornamentals IPM Coordinator at the New York State IPM program, where she works with producers of greenhouse ornamental crops, nursery crops, Christmas tree farms, cut flowers, and beyond to find effective and economical methods to manage pests. Today, Betsy will share her knowledge with us about Japanese beetle management. Betsy, you can take it away.
Thanks, Matt. And I always say that Elizabeth Lamb is my evil twin. So there's just one of me, really. So today I'm going to talk about managing Japanese beetles in your garden. And I do think that Japanese beetles are beautiful adults. So they have green heads, copper wing covers, and tufts of white hair along the sides, and they're about a half an inch long. Being beautiful on the outside, however, in this case, is only skin deep. Now, just so you know, make sure that you're looking at Japanese beetles. There are some other beetles that have the same similar coloration at any rate that also can be plant feeders and can be pests. And so what we're talking about today is Japanese beetles. Rose Schafers and green Jew beetles are also out there. And some of what we're talking about only works with Japanese beetles. So make sure that you have what you think you have. Now, their adolescents are not that attractive. These are white grubs, and white grubs also cause problems for us in that they feed on turf grasses and sometimes the roots of other plants as well. We find them as a problem sometimes in Christmas tree farms. If you really want to know which one you have of the white grubs, however, that's a little bit more difficult. You have to look at their rear end and look at the way the hairs are, and it's beyond me. So I usually ask someone else. Their life cycle. And the good has the one piece of good news. There's only one generation a year, which means we only have adults occurring at one time of the year, which is just about now. I think I saw my first one about a week and a half ago, and you'll see some pictures that I took at my mother's house where she has lots. So the adults are in June and July, sometimes into August, depending on where you are. This was from Minnesota, but it's fairly similar. And then they lay eggs in the soil. Those eggs hatch into larvae, which feed all fall and go deeper in the soil, and then come back up to the top of the soil, pupate, and come back as adults. So it goes full circle. And just in terms of thinking about when we talk about grub management, you see these grubs are up closer to the surface, and that's when they're easiest to control, when they're small and close to the surface. So why don't we like them? I mean, they're such beautiful insects. Well, they have a tendency to eat all sorts of things. So you can see they do love roses, and they will feed on the petals. And there's often quite a lot of them at once, which makes people a little creeped out. They at least are not slimy. And there's about 300 host plants. So they feed on a lot of things. Different places, different people will tell you different lists of what they feed on. But they're pretty polyphagous, we say. They eat a lot of different plants. Just to look at the different kinds of damage, often we see this where they make the holes all the way through the leaves. This is on hardy kiwi at my house last year. This was my mom's. This is feeding on flowering quince, and they're not feeding all the way through the leaves. So it's mostly giving you this brown damaged cells. Certainly you know it's Japanese beetle because there are so many there. But if you saw just the symptom without the beetles, you might think it was a disease even. But in this case, it's Japanese beetles. Interestingly, in Christmas tree farms, we found them feeding on the stems, on the top of the stems, in great numbers again, which was not something we expected. The grubs damage the turf, as I said, and you'll get brown spots in your lawn. Sometimes, however, this is what you see. And this is because the skunks and other things like that will actually dig down into the soil to feed on the grubs. So it's nice that they're killing the grubs. However, they're not very neat, and they leave kind of a mess behind. So now that we know we've got them, what do we do now? You can do adult management now and grub management in the early fall when grubs are small and feeding, as I said before. The one thing is that managing grubs on your property won't prevent adult beetles, Japanese beetles, from flying in from other areas. They're very good flyers, and they can fly quite a distance. On the Cornell campus, we used to see a lot we had a perennial plantings, and they were full of Japanese beetles, in part because the golf course was nearby and they irrigated the golf course. And the adult females like to lay their eggs in irrigated lawn areas or turf areas because the grubs survive better. So although we could have done anything we wanted to control them on the perennials, they were going to keep flying in from the golf course across the street. So for adult management, some of it is long-term planning. Nobody wants to do long-term planning. The problem is I've got them right now. What do I do? But just to think about it, there are some plants that are less attractive to Japanese beetles. Now, if it's not the plant you want, then it doesn't make a difference. But the other thing is, this list that I found, this is from the USDA reference that I'll give you at the end. They're calling them resistant. I don't believe they're resistant. I think they're just not as preferred. For example, his list here, burning bush, which is, you don't really want burning bush anyway because it's invasive, but that's one of the preferred hosts at my mother's house. So why is it on this list as being resistant? I think it has to do more with what else you have and where you are and what they're out there, what they're finding to feed on. So the best way to control them, everyone's favorite method, is hand picking. You can use a vacuum cleaner. I've seen people do that. I would have a small hand vac if I was going to use it. But then you still have to kill them once they're in the bag or leave them there until they die. The thing about using soapy water is that once they go in, it breaks the surface tension as the soap. That's what the soap's for. And then they drown rather quickly. This is from yesterday. And so they are pretty quick. And if you see a great big group of them, you may have to put your hand over the top of that leaf into the soapy water to catch them all, because they will fly away, but they'll often come back. They're, as I said, they're not slimy. So actually picking them is not, they're a little tickly, but they're not as disgusting as some things that we recommend that people hand pick. So that's really the best way to control them. But it does take time if you've got a lot and if you've got a big garden, and lots of people don't want to do it. So what else can you do? There are pheromone traps, and I'm just going to show this video partly because it shows what good flyers they are. But the other thing you might notice is they're not all going in the trap. And so they figure that they capture about 75% of the beetles that they bring in. There's a pheromone, which is, well, that's the attractant. There's a little lure in that trap. And so they smell that and they can smell it from quite a distance away. And so they'll come from quite a distance away. So sometimes they actually attract more into your yard than are already there. So if I was going to use them, and many people do, I would not put them near any plant that I knew was really susceptible or I really wanted to protect. And I might put them at the edges of my yard to try and catch things before they came in. But it is a kind of a toss-up. Some people swear by them and other people don't like them. They're really considered to be best for monitoring. So if you actually want to know whether you have Japanese beetles, that's a good way to do it. But you usually see them, so maybe monitoring is not that important. Oops. So in terms of adults, there's no commercially available biological control. However, they've introduced some insects that they're using to control them, and they're hoping that these insects will spread. This one I'm fascinated. Now I have to go look at all my Japanese beetles before I drop them in the water, because if I find these are eggs laid by the winsome fly, which is a great name. And they've actually released it to try and get control of the adults. It kills the adults in about 6 to 7 days, which is pretty fast for biological control. So if you see a Japanese beetle with these little white eggs on it, you might want to leave it, because then the next generation will hatch out, and so it'll increase the population in your area. So I'm going to start watching for them. Chemical control for adults, truly I don't recommend. The adults will keep flying in. So you can apply a chemical pesticide, but it's not going to protect them from the next group that come flying in. The other two things are, I would check the label carefully, and labels are notoriously difficult to read, but this is just one of the products that I found, and this is just part of the list of precautions and restrictions. So make sure that you know what those precautions and restrictions are. And because most of us don't really know what all the different chemicals are that are in pesticides, I would certainly not put them on food crops. And as I say, I really don't recommend them for adult management. If you're going to look at grub management, that's a little bit different. Now it's a little bit harder to find them because you have to actually dig to find them. So if you have dead spots in your yard, you might dig down 3 inches you could dig up a square meter of lawn. If you find 10 or more grubs, then it's time to treat. If there's less than that, it's probably not worth treating them. There are some really wonderful biological controls for the grubs, however. One of them is a nematode, which is a small worm, like in this picture. You will not see them with the naked eye. You can see them with a hand lens. And you can buy them in different formulations where you just apply them to your lawn. This is a healthy larva. This one's infected, and it's actually full of more nematodes. So they will come out of the one once it's dead and spread through the soil and find other grubs to infect. There is a biological pesticide called Bacillus thuringiensis, and you have to make sure that you get the variation that's called Gallerii. That will also work on grubs in the soil, and again, you can apply it to the soil. And then there's a disease. It always seems interesting to say, go apply a disease organism to your lawn, but this is a disease of white grubs in general, not just this one is just Japanese beetle, Bacillus populae, and so you're actually applying the spores. Now, most biological control, and all these three are examples of this, they don't tend to be fast. This one, for example, is considered a population suppression. So as the numbers increase over time, your grub populations will drop. It also has temperature limitations, and that it's ideal to have it between 66 and 71 Fahrenheit while the grubs are feeding in the fall. And so there's an article you can find if you Google Cornell University turfgrass times and does milky spore disease work. You can find a fact sheet on the milky spore disease and how well it might work for you. This is another one that's being introduced. I really like this kind of biological control. It's a little wasp. Actually, it's a fairly big wasp, but you probably wouldn't notice because it's not interested in us. And it actually finds the grubs in the soil and lays an egg right near them, which hatches out, and then a larva feeds on this larva and it kills the grub. So there are a few resources available. New York State IPM published a Grubs in Your Lawn flyer that you can find online. And the USDA also has a Managing the Japanese Beetle Homeowners Handbook that we'll put the link in the announcement for this program. And that's everything that I have for you today.
Well, thank you, Betsy. So I was surprised to hear that Japanese beetles actually chew on conifer stems.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a typical type of damage that they do? Like, is it usually window painting or skeletonizing, or it seems pretty variable depending on the host that they're feeding on?
It's pretty variable. And so, I mean, I think people expect to see the window painting. And so I was a little surprised when I saw the quince. It's clearly Japanese beetle because they're all over it, but they weren't feeding all the way through. And why that's true, I don't know. And on the Christmas trees, they're actually taking the bark off on the leaders.
Wow. And
I really didn't expect to see them there.
No. And in terms of hand picking them, are they typically at a height that's accessible to a person, or like will they be up higher in the canopy, or does that vary as well?
Point. I mean, those the ones that I see that I can hand pick, and I'm tending to looking at herbaceous plants. They're sort of in my range of being able to pick them, but I've never looked at the top of a tree. So I don't know, but I'm assuming that they're all over the tree.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I tend to see them on the low growing shrubs, and then fruit trees that are pruned pretty low. So I wonder, what kind of damage they're doing.
We're only seeing them where we can see them, and therefore they may be somewhere else. We just don't see them.
Right.
And they feed on so many herbaceous things that in terms of handpicking them, that's an easy place to catch them.
Right.
Well, they're not that easy to catch, but it's a place you can reach them.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Betsy. We appreciate your contributions today, and we're going to transition now to our IPM Minute. This part of the presentation takes a quick look at a timely topic and provides some action items for you to take. For this segment, I'd like to introduce our co-host for this series, Dr. Amara Dunn. Amara is the biocontrol specialist with the New York State IPM program, where she supports the effective use of biological control across New York State and beyond, working in both agricultural and community settings. And today, Amara will introduce to us some aphid-eating insects.
All right. Thank you, Matt, for that introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining us either today on Friday or anytime over your holiday weekend that's convenient for you. Today, we are going to be talking about just a few of the insects who might already be in your garden and eating aphids for you. So I have a question for you to think about. When you see aphids in your garden, what do you do? And in this picture on the right, you can see a whole bunch of orangish aphids just lined up all along this plant stem. What I'm going to suggest in the next few minutes is that before you reach for a pesticide, consider the insect natural enemies that may already be just about to bring your aphid problem under control. And I think this is especially true if you're seeing aphids in the middle of summer, like now in July, in June. The chances are you don't have to do anything about your aphids. Your natural enemies will take care of them for you. So I'm going to introduce you to 3 natural enemies, insects that are going to eat pest insects today. And the first one is lady beetles. Most folks have heard about lady beetles, but I like to remind people that there are many different species, and you're seeing just 3 of them here. This lady beetle on the left is a 7-spotted lady beetle, which is kind of our classic lady beetle. It has that round body and the black spots on the red back. Over here on the right is the multicolored Asian lady beetle. These are the lady beetles that sometimes get into our houses or other structures over the winter and can be a little bit irritating inside. You can recognize them because of the black M on this part of their body. But they are still great predators outside. And then this pink spotted lady beetle in the middle, a lot of people don't recognize this as a lady beetle because it has a very different shape. But this is just another one of many lady beetle species that might be in your garden. Lady beetles also look different at different stages in their life. So on this bottom row of pictures, these 2 first pictures on the left, we see black and orange, kind of spiky, crawling, longish insects. Some people describe them as little alligators. These are lady beetle larvae. And lady beetle larvae are great predators. They love to eat aphids. And so it's really important that you recognize these as friends in your garden. Over here on the right, we see black and orange kind of blobs. They're not doing anything. And that's because this is the resting life stage of a lady beetle. These are lady beetle pupa, and they do nothing. They attach to a leaf or some other surface in your garden and just hang out because inside this lady beetle is transitioning from being a larva to being an adult, where it will again be a predator and can also reproduce. So if you see these lady beetle pupa in your garden, you should leave them there as well. The second natural enemy I want to introduce you to are predatory flies. So the predatory flies that are easiest to spot are hoverflies, and it's perhaps a little bit confusing to call them predatory flies because hoverflies as adults are actually not predators, they're pollinators. They will feed on flowers. If you have sweat on your skin, they may pause on your arm to lick the sweat off. So some people sometimes confuse them with sweat bees. You can distinguish them from bees because they have these really large eyes that take up their whole head. Although they may be black and yellow striped or have black and yellow coloration, if they land and hold still long enough, you'll see that they only have 2 wings, as opposed to bees, which have 4 wings. However, the larvae of hoverflies and also the larvae of a number of other flies are great aphid predators. So here in this middle picture, we see a larva, not very exciting, looks like a maggot. That's because it is. Fly larvae are maggots. This is the larva of a hoverfly or a syrphid that is sucking the juices out of an aphid. Over here, we have another larva of a fly genus called Ophidiides. The adult flies are harder to recognize. They're smaller compared to the hoverflies. but also aphid predators. And then over here on the left is a fly larva that I found in my garden. I don't actually know what kind of fly larva it is, but it's eating aphids, and so I'm excited about it. And then the final natural enemy I want to draw your attention to is parasitoid wasps. The adult wasps, the actual wasps, are very, very tiny, and that's because they complete their life cycle by laying eggs inside an aphid, and then the young wasp develops inside the aphid and hatches out. So even as adults, they have to be very tiny because they're coming out of an aphid. However, it's a lot easier to see the evidence that these tiny wasps have been there. So when you see a brown aphid shell or mummy that is puffed up, that is evidence that it's been parasitized by a wasp. In this middle picture here, you can actually see a little tiny hole where the adult wasp emerged. In the picture on the left, you can see, hold on, you can see the adult wasp. And then in this picture on the right, you can see there are these brown puffy aphids amongst other black aphids. So these brown puffed up aphids are the aphid mummies. They've already been parasitized. That's a good indication you have parasitoid wasps who are going to help with the rest of your aphid population. So just an example from my own garden. A few years ago, I was noticing a really heavy aphid infestation on some black-eyed Susans. But I decided not to panic. I didn't grab any pesticides. I noticed that there were some friends already helping me out. So here we have our predatory fly larva. I also have plenty of hoverflies in my garden because I'm not using pesticides in my garden, and I'm growing lots of flowers that have pollen and nectar that feed beneficial insects. And there were lady beetles around, so I decided to do nothing. And within a week or two, the aphids were almost gone, and the black-eyed Susans did great that year. So if you see an aphid outbreak in your garden this summer, especially on flowers, I'm suggesting that you take a deep breath, wait maybe a week, maybe two, and keep your eyes open for your insect friends. Chances are your aphid problem will take care of itself. Thanks for your attention today. Some information on this slide about my Instagram account and other biocontrol resources, and good luck hunting for natural enemies.
Thank you, Amara. Really great perspective there on kind of taking that pause and letting the natural predators take their course. We often think about immediately controlling something, but the prey population has to build up before the predators have enough food to survive. So it's really good perspective. In your last slide, you mentioned waiting about 2 weeks and checking again. If you still see a high population, what is your idea on a threshold or when you should actually take some action to control aphids in your garden?
That's a good question. And Betsy might have some additional advice to add here. I think it depends a lot on where you're seeing the aphid problem. So for example, I am very unlikely to use a pesticide on my flowers, especially for an aphid problem. The aphids aren't going to kill the flowers in an outside setting. And it's just, as a gardener, it's not that important to me. I did mention that that this was especially true, this waiting for natural enemies to take care of your aphids in the middle of summer. And that's because a lot of these natural enemies of aphids are really thriving in the middle of summer. If you get to fall and you have an aphid problem, especially, for example, an aphid problem on some fall greens like kale or cabbage, that's a problem that's less likely to be brought under control by some of these natural enemies. And so that may be a situation where you need to explore some other options. Do you have anything to add, Betsy?
One of the things about aphids is they can vector some diseases, but we don't see that very often. And they don't really kill the plant unless there's just so many that the plant sap is because they're sucking the sap. But so, yeah, I think in most part, we'll find that the biocontrols will help and will keep the numbers down to a point that we're happy. If you have them on something like a food crop and it's like, okay, I want to eat that, I'd rather not have them all over it. I mean, that's one of the problems with mummies too, is because the mummies stick on in the plant as well. But some jets of water will often knock them off. And they may climb back up, but they're slow and they won't all climb back up. Also, some aphids, or I think most aphids, have what they call alarm pheromones. And if you scare some of them, the rest of them will fall off the plant. And so they then will again try and crawl up, but it's a long way up. So I don't know how you go around about scaring aphids. Maybe you squish a few and see if that scares the rest of them off.
Great. Well, thank you both. We really appreciate your presentations today and appreciate everyone for viewing this video. We hope you have a wonderful 4th of July weekend and hope you attend a future First Friday event. Thank you very much.